In just 4 days, London was reduced to ashes. But was it really just an accident, or something far more sinister? The year was 1666, a time of plague, superstition, and political unrest. London was a crowded wooden tinderbox waiting for a spark. That spark came in a bakery. Or so the official story goes. But what if the Great Fire of London wasn't merely a disaster, but a cover-up? A catalyst? A secret buried beneath smoke and rubble? This is not just the story of a fire. It's the story of a city reimagined, of whispered conspiracies, secret letters, and lost testimonies. It's about who profited, who vanished, and who was blamed. Because what burned in 1666 wasn't just timber and tar. What burned were records, secrets, histories. And in the flames, a new London emerged, richer, cleaner, and, for some, more powerful. In this documentary, we'll uncover the true conditions that turned London into a fire. Traffic warnings were ignored for decades, who was scapegoated, and how the fire reshaped politics, religion, and empire, and whether the disaster was truly accidental or engineered. The Great Fire of London is one of history's most well-known disasters, but you've never heard it told like this. Let's begin at Pudding Lane, before the first spark ever caught. Long before the fire, London was already a city on edge, a perfect storm brewing beneath the surface. In the early 1600s, London was the beating heart of a growing empire, but also a city trapped in medieval infrastructure. Narrow alleys, timber-framed, houses, thatched roofs, and open flames for cooking and heating made fire a daily threat. Yet despite centuries of smaller blazes, meaningful reform never came. Why? Because fire wasn't the only thing consuming the city. So was fear. The Black Death had ravaged London just the year before, in 1665, killing nearly 100,000 people, 1 in every 6 Londoners. Mass graves filled the outskirts. Clergy spoke of divine punishment. Those who survived did so under a thick cloud of dread. The smell of death still lingered in the summer of 1666. Then there was politics. King Charles II had only recently returned to power after years of Puritan rule during the English Civil War. The monarchy had been restored, but not everyone was loyal. Religious tension simmered, especially between Anglicans, Catholics, and Protestant dissenters. The Dutch and the French, England's rivals on the seas, were seen as threats at every corner. London was not just divided by class, it was fractured by ideology. Yet amidst this chaos, the city grew. By 1666, London had over 500,000 residents, making it one of Europe's largest cities. And it was vulnerable. While European capitals, like Paris, had begun using stone and regulating building materials, London remained mostly wood and pitch, a city built to burn. Even simple tasks like cooking or candle lighting carried enormous risk, but property owners resisted change. Fire-resistant materials were costly, space was scarce, and enforcement of building regulations was weak or non-existent. Warnings weren't new. As far back as 1212, major fires had swept through the city. In 1632, a fire destroyed over 50 homes on Thames Street. In 1661, the city issued a report urging brick construction and fire breaks, but little came of it. In short, everyone knew the city could burn. No one wanted to pay to stop it. And beneath that, something darker stirred. Foreign spies were active in the city. Xenophobic rumors swirled about French arsonists and Dutch saboteurs. When a fire did come, few doubted it was more than bad luck. Some historians point to a growing paranoia among the elite. They feared mobs, plague victims, the poor. Fire was dangerous, but revolution was worse. And so, as the summer of 1666 wore on, the city remained dry, crowded, and flammable. The plague had retreated, but tensions had not. Londoners were restless. Soldiers stood guard in the streets. And in the homes of merchants and nobles, Whispers grew louder. Then came September 2nd. A warm, windy Sunday morning. At Thomas Ferner's bakery on Pudding Lane, embers from a dying oven touched stacked firewood. A small flame appeared. Night watchmen spotted it. The Lord Mayor was called. He reportedly said a woman could piss it out. That single delay, that single dismissal, would cost London 13,000 homes, 87 churches, and its medieval identity. But whether the spark was accident or intent, that's a question still debated today. What's certain is that everything after will be changed, not just by fire, but by those who stepped forward once the smoke cleared. It started as a flicker, then became an inferno. Around 1 a.m. on Sunday, September 2nd, 1666, flames erupted inside Thomas Ferner's bakery on Pudding Lane. The baker and his family escaped through an upstairs window, but the fire spread rapidly. Within hours, embers were raining across rooftops. The city was already dry from a long, hot summer. A strong eastern wind fanned the flames, driving them westward into the densest parts of London. But what turned this into a catastrophe wasn't the fire itself. It was the lack of response. The Lord Mayor of London, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, arrived at the scene and dismissed the danger. A woman could piss it out, he reportedly said. By the time he realized the severity, it was too late. The city's antiquated firefighting methods, leather buckets, hand pump engines, and water from wells were no match for the blaze. Worse still, the one method proven to work, demolishing buildings to create fire breaks, was delayed by indecision and bureaucracy. Property owners demanded compensation before their homes were torn down. The mayor hesitated. The flames didn't single quotes T. By Monday, the firestorm had crossed London Bridge, consuming warehouses filled with pitch, tar, oil, and alcohol. Explosions echoed across the city as barrels ignited. The sky darkened with ash. Eyewitness accounts describe scenes of sheer terror. The flames made a noise like the roaring of a great beast. It was as if hell itself had broken open. Samuel Pepys, diarist and naval administrator Pepys, famously buried his wine and Parmesan cheese in his garden. To protect it, he even rode down the Thames to observe the fire's progress, sending urgent messages to the king. Charles II ordered military intervention, commanding troops to start pulling down buildings. But by then, entire neighborhoods were already gone. Despite the chaos, a strange pattern emerged. Certain parts of the city burned with unusual intensity. Stone churches cracked, metal fixtures melted. Some believe foreign agents had lit incendiary bombs or planted fireballs soaked in chemicals. Eyewitnesses claimed to see suspicious figures with fire pots darting through alleys, though none were ever caught or confirmed. One Frenchman, Robert Hubert, confessed to starting the fire. He claimed he was part of a Catholic conspiracy and had thrown a fireball through a bakery window. But there were problems. Hubert was mentally unstable. His story was inconsistent, and he wasn't even in London when the fire began. Yet he was tried, found guilty, and executed by hanging, becoming the perfect scapegoat. Hubert's confession was likely false, but it served a purpose. In a city desperate for answers, blame was more comforting than uncertainty. By Tuesday, the fire reached St. Paul's Cathedral, a towering Gothic structure that had stood for centuries. Its wooden scaffolding, erected for ongoing repairs, caught fire. Flames engulfed the structure from the inside. Molten lead ran through the streets like lava. The cathedral collapsed in a thunderous roar. It was a symbol. Medieval London, with its narrow lanes and ancient stones, was dying. By Wednesday, the wind began to die down. Fire breaks were finally taking hold. The flames weakened, and on September 6th, the fire was officially declared out. In 4 days. The Great Fire had burned over 13,000 homes, destroyed 87 churches, including St. Paul Sarah's numerous government buildings, markets, and shops, left over 80,000 people homeless. But only 6 verified deaths were recorded, a number almost certainly undercounted, as many bodies were incinerated entirely or never found. The physical destruction was vast. But it was what happened after the fire, who gained power, who vanished, and who rewrote the narrative that revealed the real legacy. Because London didn't just burn. It was cleansed, reset, rebuilt, and not everyone mourned the ashes. The fire had done its damage. In just 4 days, it had consumed the core of London. But in its wake, the city wasn't just faced with ruins. It was presented with a choice: rebuild the past, or forge a different future. And so began one of the most radical urban transformations in British history. When the last flames were extinguished, London resembled a battlefield. Charred timbers jutted from collapsed homes. The once great skyline was reduced to a blackened horizon. Over 80,000 people were homeless, many sleeping in tents or fleeing the city entirely. Amidst the wreckage, King Charles II took swift control. He ordered that no rebuilding was to begin until a formal plan was approved. His ministers, aware of the opportunity before them, called for a total redesign of the city, one that could finally match the scale of London's rising power. Only days after the fire, 5 comprehensive rebuilding plans were submitted. Among them were visionary layouts from Christopher Wren, John Evelyn, and others. Their designs proposed broad boulevards, symmetrical city blocks, piazzas, canals, a dramatic break from medieval chaos. Wren's proposal stood out: a city of logic, light, and order. He envisioned a modern metropolis, fireproof and elegant, worthy of an empire. But these plans faced a major obstacle: land ownership. London was a patchwork of thousands of freeholds, leases, and disputes. Implementing a uniform grid meant stripping property rights, a political and legal nightmare. So the grand designs were shelved. The dream of a new London would have to be scaled back. Instead of a total redesign, Parliament passed the Rebuilding of London Act in 1667. It focused not on layout, but on materials, structure, and regulation. Key reforms included: all new buildings must be constructed of brick or stone. Streets must be widened where possible. Overhanging upper floors were banned. Fabrics were required between buildings. Roofs must be tiled, not that traditionally. 4 new building types were introduced. From modest cottages to grand mansions, each with strict height and width limits. This standardization became the foundation of modern urban zoning. And in a groundbreaking move, fire courts were established. These special courts resolved property disputes quickly, ensuring the rebuilding didn't stall over ownership battles. It was one of the earliest examples of state-backed urban arbitration. Though Wren's original plan was rejected, his star was rising. A brilliant polymath, Wren had already worked on Oxford's Sheldonian Theatre and was deeply respected by the king. In 1669, he was appointed surveyor of the king's works, effectively chief architect of London's rebirth. Wren's mission? Rebuild the city's spiritual backbone, its churches. Before the fire, London had over 100 parish churches. 87 were destroyed. Wren, aided by his talented assistant Nicholas Hawksmoor, set out to design over 50 new churches. Each one was unique, not just in form, but in symbolism. They weren't just houses of worship. They were monuments to survival, unity, and divine judgment. The original St. Paul's had been a Gothic giant, dark, medieval, and encumbered by age. After the fire, only fragments remained. Wren's new design, approved in 1675, was radical: a soaring Baroque cathedral, crowned with a massive dome, inspired by St. Peter's in Rome. It would take 35 years to complete, and it would stand not just as a religious structure, but as a symbol of national identity. When it was finally finished in 1710, St. Paul's Cathedral dominated the skyline. For centuries, no building in London was allowed to rise higher. It was a declaration. The city had been broken, but it had not been beaten. As the rubble cleared, power began to shift. Small tradesmen and poor tenants, many of whom lacked deeds or formal titles, were often pushed out. Unable to prove ownership or afford rebuilding, they sold their plots at low prices or simply left. Meanwhile, wealthy merchants and aristocrats bought up entire streets. Land was consolidated. Homes were rebuilt bigger and taller. The fire had acted as a social filter, accelerating the gentrification of the city core. New commercial centers rose from the ashes. Paternoster Row, once a publishing hub, became more organized. The Royal Exchange and Lombard Street were rebuilt. To support banking guilds and trading houses were redesigned for international business. London, once a messy medieval town, was now becoming a capital of commerce. One of the most lasting legacies of the fire was the birth of modern fire insurance. In 1680, the Fire Office was founded, the first formal fire insurance company in England. Others quickly followed, including Sun Fire Office and Royal Exchange Assurance. To protect their investments, these insurers began hiring private fire brigades. Buildings with policies displayed fire marks, metal plaques showing the company responsible for protecting it. If your home was on fire and didn't carry a valid fire mark, the brigade might ride right past you. It was capitalism in action, protection for a price. These private brigades eventually laid the foundation for the London Fire Brigade. Formalized nearly 2 centuries later, London's fire wasn't just a British disaster. It was a European lesson. Cities like Amsterdam, Vienna, and Paris took note. Many began reinforcing their fire codes, widening streets, and updating water systems. In Sweden, King Charles XI ordered all new towns to follow stone-based designs after seeing London's vulnerability. In the American colonies, cities like Boston and Philadelphia later used London's fire as a cautionary tale. Benjamin Franklin would famously advocate for fire departments, insurance, and civic preparedness based on lessons from the 1666 blaze. Over the next 5 decades, the rebuilt city took shape. Monument to the Great Fire, a 202-foot-tall column by Wren, was erected near Pudding Lane. New churches filled the skyline with steeples and domes. Regulations shaped the layout of future neighborhoods. But even as stone replaced timber, the memory of fire lingered. For generations, children were taught the story of Robert Hubert, the supposed French arsonist, as fact, despite the holes in his confession. Anti-Catholic sentiments smoldered for decades, inflamed by fire folklore. By the early 18th century, London had transformed. No longer just a seat of monarchy or merchant trade. It became the prototype for the modern imperial city, centralized, regulated, and globally connected. The Great Fire hadn't ended London's rise. It had accelerated it. What began as tragedy had birthed something greater, through law, through science, through architecture. But behind the progress stood a truth. Destruction can serve power. The fire didn't just clear buildings. It cleared resistance. It weakened the poor. It elevated the crown. And it allowed a few to redraw the city in their image. So was the fire truly just an accident? Or was it, in some unspoken way, the perfect opportunity? The answers remain, buried beneath soot and stone. The fire had ravaged London's past, but from its ashes emerged a vision of the future. And not just architecturally. The Great Fire of 1666 didn't just rebuild a city. It re-engineered society. Before the blaze, London was a labyrinth of medieval life. Cramped tenements, feuding parishes, dirt roads, and a population governed more by tradition than infrastructure. But once the smoke cleared, change was no longer optional. It was unstoppable. For the first time, urban planning entered the public consciousness. The new regulations required brick homes, wider streets, and fireproof materials. And suddenly, people began thinking about their city as a system, not just a collection of homes. Daily life changed. Candles had to be monitored. Cooking hearths were rebuilt. Streets had to remain clear. Fire safety became a civic duty, not just a private concern. Insurance, once a luxury, now became a necessity. By the 1680s, fire insurance was booming. Homes displayed iron plaques indicating their coverage, and private fire brigades became a common sight. Landlords competed to have the best policies, not just to protect their tenants, but to attract them. For merchants, The fire cleared away tangled streets and created room for organized marketplaces and commercial centers. The rebuilt Royal Exchange and nearby banking houses helped accelerate London's rise as a global financial capital. Trade increased. Trust in long-term investment grew. Even international commerce began to favor a city that had learned how to withstand catastrophe. And for the government, the fire gave the crown unprecedented leverage. Charles II used it to consolidate control, standardize building practices, and centralize decisions previously left to parishes or guilds. A stronger urban state began to emerge, one that could shape how citizens lived, moved, and rebuilt. Socially too, the fire changed things. Many of the city's poorest residents were forced out of the inner boroughs, never to return. Wealthier landowners bought up prime land, building uniform terraces and homes that defined the aesthetic of London for centuries. In effect, the fire had created a cleaner, more ordered, more elite capital. But to many, the fire was also a divine message, a reckoning. Sermons boomed from rebuilt pulpits that London had been judged by God and given a second chance. The city was more than restored. It was reborn, physically and spiritually. Architecture became morality carved in stone. The Great Fire had sparked not just rebuilding, but a cultural shift. Londoners had looked into the flames and seen a new kind of city staring back. 3.5 centuries after the Great Fire, London stands as one of the world's great cities, resilient, refined, and layered in history. But the fire's legacy isn't just preserved in monuments. It lives on in the very bones of the modern metropolis. In the centuries that followed, fire prevention became policy, not reaction. By the 19th century, London had transitioned from private fire brigades to a centralized public firefighting force. In 1866, exactly 200 years after the Great Fire, the Metropolitan Fire Brigade was formed, a professional service equipped with standardized uniforms, horse-drawn engines, and a chain of command. It was a direct descendant of the chaos that once led a bakery. Blaze destroyed a capital. Modern fire codes, mandating sprinklers, fire exits, and structural regulations trace their origin back to 1666. Across the UK today, every structure, from historic churches to new skyscrapers, is shaped by rules that exist because of that one historic blaze. The architectural legacy is equally alive. Christopher Wren's churches still tower over parts of the city, elegant, symmetrical, defiant. His masterpiece, St. Paul's Cathedral, remains a national symbol. Its dome, scarred but unbroken during the Blitz of World War II, reminded citizens once again that London may burn, but it does not fall. Today, the area most affected by the fire, the ancient square mile of the City of London, is home to cutting-edge skyscrapers like the Gherkin, Walkie-Talkie, and Shard nearby. These modern marvels rise from soil once scorched to ash, standing atop medieval street plans now buried under concrete and commerce. Yet amid glass and steel, the fire is still remembered. The monument to the Great Fire, designed by Wren and Hook, still stands near Pudding Lane. School children still learn the date, 1666 annual fire drills. Urban resilience studies and emergency infrastructure projects still cite the disaster as a case study. In a sense, the Great Fire has become a permanent institution, a reminder that destruction is inevitable, but how we respond determines whether a city crumbles or climbs. But not all has been progress. In recent years, Britain has faced criticism over modern fire safety. The Grenfell Tower fire in 2017, which killed 72 people, reignited national outrage over inadequate building codes, poor oversight, and dangerous cladding materials. Many ask, how could a country shaped by the Great Fire of London allow such a tragedy again? The echoes of 1666 rang through Parliament. Investigations were launched. Policies were reviewed. And a painful truth was revealed. Progress is not permanent. It must be maintained, or it too will burn. In cultural terms, the Great Fire has been immortalized in novels, documentaries, museum exhibitions, and interactive installations. From wax figures in the Museum of London to AR simulations used in classrooms, the event remains educational, cautionary, and oddly contemporary. Why? Because the questions raised in 1666 about leadership, disaster preparedness, blame, and recovery are the same ones cities face today. From wildfires in California to earthquakes in Istanbul, London's survival wasn't just about building back stronger. It was about learning and remembering. The Great Fire of London did more than reshape a city. It redefined an era. Before 1666, London was a medieval patchwork, built in haste, ruled by custom, and vulnerable to chaos. After the fire, it became a symbol of resilience, foresight, and transformation. But perhaps its greatest legacy lies not in what was rebuilt, but in what was remembered. Culturally, the fire burned itself into the English identity. For generations, it became the moral tale taught to children, a story of punishment and redemption. Churches thundered with sermons about sin and judgment. Writers framed it as divine warning. But beneath the theology, a more practical lesson took hold. Cities are fragile, and leadership in crisis determines survival. The fire gave birth to institutions we take for granted today: urban planning regulations, fire insurance, and property risk assessment organized. Professional fire services, public health reforms following disaster. And its fingerprints are global. Cities like Chicago, San Francisco, Tokyo, all struck by devastating fires in later centuries, turned to London's story for lessons in rebuilding smarter and safer. It became the template not just for how to rise from the ashes, but how to rethink what caused the ashes in the first place. Technologically, the event marked a quiet revolution. The introduction of standard brick construction, spacing between houses, and elevation control would inform British building codes for centuries. In effect, it was the fire that finally pulled London, architecturally and administratively, into the modern age. Even spiritually, the city was changed. Wren's churches, especially St. Paul's, were not only feats of design, they were beacons of stability. Their domes and steeples reminded a wounded people that their world could be made whole again. But the fire's legacy also carries shadows. To this day, debate lingers about the true cause. Was it accidental? Was Robert Hubert's confession just convenient fiction? Was there more behind the inaction, the blame, the speed of certain land acquisitions? Some questions still smolder. Yet one thing remains certain: 1666 was a turning point. In that year, a city built for a medieval world was forced by flame into a modern one. And in doing so, it helped shape the way cities everywhere would rise, fall, and rise again. If the Great Fire of 1666 forced London to evolve, then its legacy forces us to ask, how do cities today prepare for tomorrow's flames? The risks we face have changed, and yet the threat remains. Today's urban vulnerabilities lie not just in wood and thatch, but in cyber attacks, overloaded infrastructure, failing climate resilience, and dangerously unequal access to emergency response. And just as in 1666, it may take disaster to expose the cracks, experts now warn that megacities are more flammable than ever, not in the literal sense, but in how a single failure can cascade: electrical fires sparking wild blazes, heat waves, igniting dry zones, misinformation spreading faster than help can arrive, the rise of smart cities, AI-driven surveillance. And automated fire detection systems offer hope, but also introduce new dependencies. Who controls the data? What happens when digital defenses fail? Some urban planners now advocate for resilience-first design, cities built not just for beauty or function, but for survivability. Underground water systems, self-healing materials, drone firefighting units, ideas that sound like science fiction until they're needed. And as climate change intensifies, fire itself is returning as a global threat. From the hills of California to the forests of Greece, we're once again learning how fast nature can erase human ambition and how slow we are to react. So we look to the past. We study London's fire not just as a story of ashes, but of action, of hesitation, of blame, of redemption. And we ask, what is today's Pudding Lane? Who is our modern-day Lord Mayor, ready to act or dismiss the danger? What secrets might be buried beneath tomorrow's rubble? Because one thing history teaches, clearly, the fire always comes. What we do before it and after is what defines us. From a bakery spark on Pudding Lane to the towering dome of St. Paul's, the Great Fire of 1666 reshaped more than just London's skyline. It rebuilt systems, rewrote laws, and redefined resilience. What began in panic ended in planning. What burned was a city of the past. What rose was a city of the future. We followed the journey, from smoldering alleys to soaring ambition. We've uncovered secrets, confronted myths, and examined the legacy that still shapes our cities today. If story stirred something in you, the drama, the mystery, the lessons, then don't let it fade. Like the video to support historical storytelling, share it with someone who thinks history is just about dates and dust. Comment below, what surprised you most about the Great Fire? And subscribe for more deep dives into history's forgotten turning points, because what we remember can protect us, and what we forget may burn us again.